there, AP Environmental, and welcome to Ecosystems Ecology. In this video lesson of the living world in ecosystems ecology, you're going to learn about the movement of energy. Through this video lesson, you should be able to explain the concept of how an ecosystem's boundaries are defined, describe the process of photosynthesis and respiration, distinguish among the trophic levels that exist in food chains and food webs, and then also quantify an ecosystem's productivity. Ecosystem boundaries are not clearly defined. The characteristics of any given ecosystem are highly dependent upon the climate that exists in that particular location. So, for example, ecosystems in the dry desert of Death Valley, California, where temperatures get to 50 degrees Celsius, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, are very different from those on the continent of Antarctica, where temperatures may drop to negative 85 degrees Celsius, negative 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Water can range from being immersible in deserts to being very defining features as far as ecosystems of lakes and oceans. The biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem provide the boundaries that distinguish one system from another. Some ecosystems have very well-defined boundaries. A cave, for example, is a very well-defined boundary. If you are a bat and you live inside a cave, you are highly developed for that particular system and probably don't venture too far from it. A combination of a lot of ecosystems together form what we call a biosphere. And this is a region on the planet where a large scale of life resides. Our biosphere on planet Earth is 12 kilometers deep inside of the Earth, to the deepest part of the ocean, to the highest mountain peak, and the whole surrounding system where you find life on planet Earth. Not every ecosystem has to be, huge. Some ecosystems can be very, very small, like this one that's inside of a tree hole. A rain-filled tree hole can house a diverse amount of species like you see here. This is fly larva right here, and there's your fly larva. Single-celled organisms. This is a single-celled algae, and here we have another larva of some winged creature. It's hard to tell, picture's kind of small. And even the greater Yellowstone National Park, has its own boundary. Because all of these organisms are contained, they technically qualify as their own ecosystem because they all live inside of that system of boundaries. Photosynthesis captures energy and respiration releases energy. To understand how ecosystems function and how they work, it's best to be able to understand the process of the movement of energy and matter throughout that system. Nearly all of the energy that powers an ecosystem comes from the sun. We call that solar energy, which in its form is kinetic energy. Organisms like plants, algae, and even some bacteria, they use the sun's energy to produce usable forms of energy, and we call those guys producers, also known as autotrophs, who create their own food. But now that you're in college, we call that they make usable forms of energy. These producers participate in a process called photosynthesis, which usually means that solar energy is converted into carbon dioxide and water, in turn glucose. Glucose is a form of potential energy that can be used for a wide range of organisms. The photosynthesis process also produces oxygen, or O2, elemental oxygen, atmospheric oxygen, as a waste product. That's why plants and other producers are beneficial to the atmosphere. I mean, they basically produce the oxygen that we breathe. Producers just don't use that oxygen to make sugary things for us to eat. They produce that glucose by photosynthesis to store energy and build their own structures like stems and leaves and roots. Other organisms, such as herbivores, eat the tissue of those producers, and they gain energy, well, essentially chemical energy, from those tissues. They do this through a process called cellular respiration. It's a process in which the cells unlock energy that is stored in the chemical bonds inside of that molecule. There's a special type of cellular respiration called aerobic respiration, in which cells convert glucose and oxygen, O2, into energy via the carbon dioxide and water. This is best seen in a diagram. In the top part of this diagram, we have a leaf. Sunlight energy enters the leaf, and the leaf uses carbon dioxide and water and goes through photosynthesis to produce O2 and glucose. Respiration is usually performed by all organisms, okay, not just producers. And in respiration, the cells use O2 and glucose, and they produce an energy and carbon dioxide and water. So producers that capture this energy move this energy through many levels, many trophic levels. A consumer is an organism that is capable of photosynthesis and must obtain its energy by consuming other organisms. We also call that a heterotroph or heterotroph, depending upon if you're old like me. An herbivore is a consumer that eats producers, also known as a primary consumer, a veggie eater. A carnivore is a consumer that eats other consumers. So carnivores can eat on multiple levels of the trophic pyramid, trophic diagram. A secondary consumer is a carnivore that eats only primary consumers, and tertiary consumers are carnivores that eat secondary consumers. Trophic levels is a word that's derived from the Greek word troph or troph, which also means nourishment. This successive levels of energy transfer is called a trophic diagram, which we see as trophic levels. When you look at a sequence of consumption, it derives what we call a food chain. Simple food chains link producers and consumers, and then secondary consumers in a linear fashion to just show how energy and matter are transferred through different trophic levels of an ecosystem. So an example here, we see a terrestrial food chain and an aquatic food chain. Bald eagles eat fish. Fish eat lots of zooplankton. The only thing available for zooplankton to eat is algae. On the African savanna, it's a little simpler of a food chain where there are lots of different types of grasses. Zebra herbivores, primary consumers, eat grasses, and then lions are secondary consumers. So a food chain helps us visualize how energy and matter are moving in between trophic levels in an ecosystem. A more realistic type of model is what we call a food web. It's this complex model of how energy is really moving through trophic levels. Food webs illustrate that one of the most important concepts in ecology, and that is that all species in an ecosystem are connected, at least in one way or another. Not all organisms fit into this neatly single trophic level type of diagram. Some organisms, called omnivores, operate on several different levels at one time. Omnivores are things like grizzly bears, because they can also eat berries and fish. Another odd one would be like a Venus flytrap, because not only do they photosynthesize, but they can also digest insects to remove enzymes from their body. So each trophic level eventually produces dead individuals as a waste product. There are 3 different types of organisms that feed off of dead organic decaying matter. We call them scavengers, detritivores, and decomposers. Scavengers are organisms like vultures. They basically consume mostly dead animal parts. Detritivores are organisms like dung beetles. Their specialty is breaking down what we would call detritus. There's a lot of detritivores out there in the natural freshwater wetland that you will be learning about throughout the semester. The other part is a decomposer. A decomposer is very specialized. They're things like fungus and bacteria, and they basically completely break down all organic matter and convert it into really, really tiny molecules, things that you would find on the periodic table. But basically, the story goes without scavengers, detritivores, decomposers, there would be no way to recycle matter and energy throughout the system. Here we have a simplified food web. It's one of my favorite food webs. It's about the African plains. You can see how it's color coded. In AP Environmental Science, you're required to be able to understand diagrams like these and pull what the organism's responsibility and what its energy transfer is out of these diagrams.